Belgium's Prime Minister had a warning for the EU today. Bart de Wever is worried that the European Union's plan to use frozen Russian state assets to fund Ukraine's war against Russia's invasion could undermine chances of a future peace deal. He also fears it could expose his country and the financial market infrastructure services Euroclear to Russian retaliation. The Belgian leader's support is important because most of the assets are being held in his country, part of a roughly €140 billion pot the EU wants to tap. Now, his warnings came after EU leaders failed to win Belgium's support at their last summit and as the European Commission seeks fresh proposals. EU heads of state and government will meet on the 18th and 19th of December, hoping to come up with something to satisfy Belgian doubts. Belgium, of course, is under growing pressure from allies who say Europe can't afford more delays. Germany's Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is one of those calling for urgent action.
I see the necessity of doing this becoming ever more urgent. Ukraine needs our support and the Russian attacks are increasing. Winter is approaching. We are already in winter. And therefore, I hope that we will reach a joint solution within the European Union. I have already spoken with the Belgian Prime Minister about this topic, both bilaterally and in the European Council. I know his concerns. I can understand them. He has good arguments. But I believe we also have good arguments in order to achieve the goal that we want to achieve together, namely to exert maximum pressure on Russia.
Meanwhile, Hungary's leader has also been demonstrating the difficulty of getting the Europeans to sing from the same hymn sheet. Viktor Orban was in Moscow today. He signed a new deal on Russian oil and gas supplies, which he says are vital for his country's energy security. Hungary, of course, is not only a member of the European Union, but also of NATO. Mr. Orban has maintained close ties with Russia despite its illegal invasion of Ukraine. He's also often questioned Western military aid for Kyiv. Now, those talks came as US envoy Steve Witkoff prepares to meet Vladimir Putin in Moscow next week in a renewed push to end the war. Viktor Orban has offered the Hungarian capital Budapest as a possible venue for future peace talks. Let's talk about the difficulties of herding European cats with Mariana Bujerin, who's a senior researcher at the Center for Nuclear Security Policy at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She specializes in European security and US policy towards Ukraine. Welcome to DW. Let's start with those Belgian worries about becoming a target for Russian retaliation and also, of course, of frightening foreign investors if it allows the EU to just help itself to Russian funds and lend them to Ukraine. Are those fears justified, do you think?
Well, Phil, they're just part of a pattern that has emerged throughout this war where the European Union is basically reacting rather than acting or setting the agenda on the European continent in this war, right? So now that we have some prospects, tenuous though they are, of a peace deal brokered by the United States, we see some European leaders, specifically the Belgian Prime Minister, whom you mentioned, reacting to this possibility and fearing that if the relations with Russia will go back to business as normal. Should this deal go ahead, then there might be repercussions, right? So he's hedging his bets. This question has been delayed for a very long time, right? And now it's coming to a head again at a very sensitive political moment. The issue of Russia's frozen funds has been on the table now for quite some time. And it is, again, a difficulty of arriving at a decision that all European member states can stand behind.
But as you say, they've been talking about this issue for some time. That predates this latest mad, frantic rush for a deal, doesn't it? Belgium has had these fears for some time.
Well, there has been progress, right, on the issue, and we see now the backtracking simply because the background political situation is shifting with the possibility of this deal. So if we had a U.S. commitment to supporting Ukrainian war effort, right, to put it in a better situation to negotiate rather than pressure on Ukraine and kind of bowing to Russian demands, which the original 28-point plan has been, then perhaps the Belgian Prime Minister would feel more confident in taking a stance on these assets.
Okay. And then we have the spectacle of Viktor Orban doing this deal for continued cheap Russian energy in defiance of EU moves to completely phase out the use of Russian energy. So let me give you three questions in one. How damaging is that Hungarian deal to European unity on Ukraine? What's the EU doing to bring Hungary into line? And what does Viktor Orban really want?
Yes, all very good questions, Phil. I mean, Hungary, or I should say, Viktor Orban is true to his game here. He has been the spoiler in the European Union on the Ukrainian question, but not only, for quite some time. So none of this is particularly surprising, right? It's hard to see how this serves the Hungarian interest, generally speaking. It certainly serves Russian interests. So, the people like Orban, they represent basically Russian interests within the European Union. And this is a reality that the EU has to really tackle and doesn't have particularly good tools. So previously, Orban has been bribed to agree to a deal on assistance to Ukraine. How long can this continue? And does bribing only encourage bad behavior within the EU? That remains a question. And that goes to a broader principle of decision making in the European Union, which is making decisions by consensus. And that is something the European Union has to, if it is to be an actor in the Ukraine situation, but possibly beyond, it has to find a way to circumvent, because we really don't have a good solution right now to how to keep this European Union with each state holding a veto.
Okay, let's talk about the Trump deal that is taking up so much attention at the moment. It's now been amended by Ukraine and Europe. And what we've seen is that every time Donald Trump or Steve Witkoff come out of a meeting with Vladimir Putin, whatever they went in with ends up looking like whatever Vladimir Putin wants. So where does this latest process go? If Steve Witkoff comes out of next week's Moscow meeting with a deal that recognizes Crimea, Luhansk and Donetsk as Russian and tells Kyiv to suck it up or lose all US support?
That is certainly a possibility. That would be, again, true to the pattern that we've seen emerge. There would be some progress between Americans and Ukrainians, and then, the Russians get a phone call or a meeting, and then it goes back to, kind of incorporating Russia's interests into this deal. It is certainly easier for Washington to pressure Kyiv than to create the kinds of circumstances under which Russia is forced to compromise in this deal. And, even though some of Russia's energy companies have been sanctioned by the Trump administration recently, generally the pattern has been, or the approach has been, to mount pressure on Ukraine, because that's the easiest thing to do. And possibly the Trump administration is hoping that will bring the deal to a completion quicker. Now, a quick deal does not necessarily mean a fair deal, a just deal, or a sustainable peace deal. And so in pursuing this negotiations process, there certainly could be an outcome where President Zelensky, under pressure, agrees to sign something, agrees to a set of really painful compromises. What we have to keep in mind is that he still has to bring that deal home.
Right.
And he has to sell that deal domestically to the society that has borne a very, very high cost in this war. Not just the troops on the ground, but everyone, millions of Ukrainians who have mobilized their resources, who have donated, who have contributed to the war effort, precisely in these places where the state has been found wanting, right? So he has a very big domestic issue on his hand,
right.
Not to mention the latest corruption scandal that has rocked his administration. And another thing to keep in mind is that, even if Ukraine is compromised and somehow, accepts these compromises and deals with them, there are greater consequences for the entire international order, as we've known it since 1945, where, gains achieved by military force formally recognized. What does it mean for our system of the United Nations,
okay.
of United Nation Charter, right? So these are the broader issues that have to be considered here.
Thank you for that. Let's end by talking about those corruption allegations which have led to the resignation of President Zelensky's chief of staff. Andriy Yermak was very much part of those peace negotiations. So what happens to them now that he has stepped down in the light of all that?
Actually, it is a positive development as far as possible prospects for achieving a better deal for Ukraine. That, of course, will depend who replaces Yermak as chief of Zelensky's staff. There are some rumors that would be the former Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. That would be an excellent development. She's a very capable official and has very good contacts in the United States on both sides of the aisle. So that could actually mean that Ukraine would appear less compromised by these troubles at home, that President Zelensky actually did react to these allegations, and specifically against someone who has been very close personally to him, Andriy Yermak, and he's willing to make painful, personnel changes, even at this crucial moment, to better his country's chances and the credibility of his office. That should be, that's very important in this historical moment.
Good talking to you. Thank you for talking us through that, Mariana. Mariana Bujerin from the MIT Center for Nuclear Security Policy.